The passenger of the Trans-Siberian. I was in deep sleep, curled up in the narrow upper berth of a third-class carriage as an old Soviet train rumbled east along the Trans-Siberian Railway. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels against the tracks had lulled me into unconsciousness, but a dull ache in my limbs, along with the familiar pull of nicotine, stirred me awake. I pushed the curtain aside and peered through the grimy window. A pale mist curled over the platform outside. Dawn was breaking. Krasnoyarsk railway station. Slipping a cigarette between my lips, I climbed down and made my way toward the exit. But halfway down the aisle, I was swallowed by a sudden surge of movement. A wave of new passengers, mostly Asian, pushing their way into the carriage with quiet urgency. A chain of nearly 40 people was hauling a mountain of suitcases and cardboard boxes from the platform, moving with practiced efficiency. Orders were whispered, hands worked fast, and luggage was crammed into every available space. No one even looked at me, as if I didn't exist. Dodging bags and sharp elbows, I finally stumbled onto the platform and exhaled in relief. I assumed they were traders from China, ferrying goods from Russia. Moments later, the conductor's sharp voice rang out. "Zakodim, Zakodim. Get in, get in." I crushed my cigarette beneath my boot and stepped back aboard. When I returned to my seat, a new passenger had taken the spot opposite me, one of the newcomers. He was thin, perhaps in his late 40s or early 50s, wearing only a pair of shorts, perched on his seat with his knees drawn to his chest. Between us sat a massive, well-worn suitcase taking up most of the space. I gestured toward the overhead rack. "Shang, Shang!" Up. At first, he just stared at me blankly. Then, after a few moments, a small, hesitant smile crossed his face. We lifted the heavy suitcase together and secured it above. There was something odd about him. Not just in the way cultural differences make strangers seem foreign, but something deeper. His entire group carried an air of quiet mystery, an unspoken weight in their expressions. I tried to speak to him, relying on gestures and what little Mandarin I knew. But he simply stared back, uncomprehending. Either my pronunciation was terrible, or he wasn't allowed to understand me. The train pressed on through vast, endless landscapes, rolling plains, dense taiga. Hours blurred together. When night fell, I climbed into my berth, leaving my silent companion to his thoughts below. The next morning sunlight streamed through the dusty window, pulling me from sleep. I glanced down. He was still there, motionless. But outside, Lake Baikal, a boundless sapphire mirror, its surface fractured by a golden streak of sunlight. Gentle waves kissed the rocky shore, and beyond, emerald green slopes rose toward mist-covered peaks. "Beautiful," he murmured. I was startled, both by his voice and by the fact that he spoke Russian. "Yes," I replied slowly. "Very beautiful." For the first time, his expression softened. "Where are you from?" "Greece," I said. He frowned as if struggling to understand. I repeated, "Sila," trying the Mandarin pronunciation, but his face remained blank. Frustrated, I pulled out my phone and pointed to a map. His eyes lit up in recognition. "I am from North Korea," he finally said. A strange thrill coursed through me. North Korea? I had never met a North Korean before. I had, in fact, believed such an encounter was nearly impossible. Over the next few days, we built a hesitant camaraderie, using his tiny, dog-eared Korean-Russian dictionary, my phone's erratic translation app, and a lot of patience. One evening, he leaned in and whispered, There is a snitch among us. Someone within their group, a government informant, watching, listening, ready to report any sign of disloyalty. They were laborers, sent under a little-known agreement between Pyongyang and Moscow, cheap North Korean workers for Russian construction projects. 17 to 20 hours of work per day, 7 days a week. The Russian contractors paid 500 rubles per worker, but most of it went directly to the North Korean government. The little that remained was still more than they could ever earn back home. Then, one night, he slid a photograph across the table. A man, a woman, and 2 young girls, standing beneath a framed portrait of Kim Jong-un. "My family," he whispered. A lump formed in my throat. They had been chosen for this work because they had families, hostages, ensuring their obedience. Running away was unthinkable, even if one of them managed to escape. Where would they go? They spoke no Russian, had no money, no knowledge of the outside world. And if they were caught, they wouldn't just suffer. Their families would. On our final night, I met a South Korean girl who had boarded our carriage. Later, when I returned, he asked about her. "She's from South Korea," I said. "Oh no, I must not talk to her. That would be very wrong." "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He opened his notebook and pointed to a word: ideology. For days, he had avoided speaking about his country. But now, on our last night, he handed me his notebook one final time. Poverty, repression, fear, violence, injustice. And beneath them, a plea. You must help. Your country must help. The world must help. We locked eyes, an unspoken understanding passing between us. That night, I fell asleep, expecting to say goodbye in the morning. Instead, I woke up to an empty carriage. They were gone. No trace. No farewell. Vanished, like ghosts dissolving into the dark. And just like that, the train rumbled on, carrying me forward, while they faded into the past,